Hello there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb. Today I am joined by Adam Francisco, Scott Keith, and Bruce Hillman to discuss the Fellowship of the Ring. We have, as I said during the Hobbit episode, we've been asked for years to do Tolkien, and just haven't gotten around to it, or as I think I learned in the last 2 weeks, and you did too, it is quite the commitment to reread some of this Tolkien in a given period of time, like on a deadline. So, especially, I hear I'm a slave driver because it occurred over Christmas week.
Well, this is the day after Christmas.
This is the day after Christmas, so I'm a very bad producer with my timing, apparently. So, apologies to those who are recording with me, but we are going to talk about the Fellowship of the Ring. When I was editing the Hobbit episode, I wanted to change how we did it a little bit because we sort of interspersed summary throughout, and I think that was probably fine, but I think it would be better to give a brief, short summary and then sort of talk about what we liked, what I think in my dad's case, what we didn't like, and where things are going from here. Maybe try to find some theological implication to talk about and just go from there. Part of the reason that I find these so hard to summarize
because they're so stinking long.
Is because they're long.
Okay.
And because at this point, I also assume that most people who would tune into an episode titled The Fellowship of the Ring
have read them,
have some idea of what's going on, either by reading or by watching the movies, right? And Tolkien is just so ingrained in the culture as well, and the inspiration, as we've talked about, for other fantasy, that I think most people have an idea of what's going on. So it makes it hard to feel out how basic of an overview we should give versus how into detail. But unlike The Hobbit, I don't think there's a reason to attempt squeezing in the plot of every chapter into 40 minutes. We won't talk about anything else if we did that. So I think we're just going to give as brief of a summary as we can, assume people know the general plot of the Fellowship of the Ring, or maybe just the Lord of the Rings in general, and then go from there for our own interests as in the Fellowship of the Ring. So, does it sound good to everybody? Everybody okay with that? Right before the show, I said we were going to do this, and I was like, hey, maybe 3-minute summary, and Bruce came up with a 20-second summary, so I think we run with that. So Bruce, you want to give us your lightning-fast overview of the Fellowship of the Ring?
Yeah, it's about a diverse cast of characters who have to travel to destroy an evil ring that can corrupt the world, and not all of them make it.
And not all of them make it.
In the first book, is it fair to say that they're pretty much at this point just trying to get into Rivendell because they don't really know what to do with the ring yet?
No, they go past Rivendell.
The main gist of, well, I guess the main gist of
the first book,
the first two
books of the Fellowship of the Ring,
is that they're trying to get there. I mean, if we're just talking about the Fellowship of the Ring, it feels like to me, for most of the Fellowship of the Ring, until you get to what I think Peter Jackson labeled the Council of Elrond, they don't really know what the heck the end goal for the ring is yet. Most of the first book.
Until the Council. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely an interesting part of it. Picking up from where we did with The Hobbit, in a sense, Gandalf continues to be, he's one of the most notable figures in the series, but he also continues to be sort of this guy who starts journeys with very little information and then pops in at very critical moments, and that's about it, and then comes back. And so for somebody who is sort of so notable and so, fan favorite and loved, his role is often starting things, but with a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I mean, he's. I think at this point, he would annoy the heck out of me because he likes to get a lot of people in trouble and put them in a lot of danger, and then be like, "Oh, I've got something more important to do, so I'll check you in a month or two." and like
or a year or two.
breezes out, and you're like, they're left going, so what are we doing? And along the way, they meet some characters that like fill in some of the blanks for them, but not all of the blanks. I gotta say, I'm not trying to complain about Tolkien, but one of the more sort of annoying themes for me in this is the number of people they run into. I'm not going to remember all the elf names because Jiminy Christmas, but like even the first elves that they run into, and then Tom Bombadil, and then Strider. Everybody knows more than the hobbits. Like, everybody knows more than the hobbits about what's going down. Like, everybody knows more than the hobbits. But they'll go, hey, we could tell you more because we know more. But, you know, it's dinner time, and these things are best left till morning. And then morning, like, the Black Riders come around like, well, forgot to get to it.
Better
and then,
get out of here.
Boom. Then you run into Tom Bombadil. He's like, you know, I know everything, but it's sleepy sleep time, so I can't talk about it now. We'll talk about it in the morning. And then you wake up in the morning and the Lady of the River is looking beautiful, so he gets distracted. Oh, my gosh. Drives me crazy.
There is Bruce was talking about the how it should have ended videos beforehand. Yeah. And there are, you know, you can see there are several moments where you could like tie up the plot fast, right? Oh. You could be like, and the elves that they run into in the forest whisk them away, you know, very quickly and safely to their destination. And you're like, okay. But nothing ever really happens like that. I mean,
all I'm saying is if I were Frodo, I would stop. Because I don't even really know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And this is like the worst time I've ever had in my entire life. And I'm really uncomfortable, and I'm getting eaten by midges, which I don't know what a midge is really. It seems to me like a little biting fly or something like that. And I don't know why I'm doing it, because no one will actually give me the full story. Like, everybody knows the full story. No one's going to tell me the full story. And I'd be like, peace out. I'm going back to the Shire.
See, the things you don't like about the book are the things that I love about the book. But this is interesting, too. We had a very brief conversation about this before we started recording. Of course, Tolkien and Lewis were very good friends in the Inklings group in Oxford. And I remember reading an account once of when Lewis had given Tolkien a copy of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe to review. Yeah. And he kind of was like, this is a piece of crap. Like, it's like, there's nothing to this story. This is like the story you tell to your grandchildren, like making it up as you go. And it doesn't matter, because he had written this whole epic, you know, piece based off like Beowulf and ancient Anglo-Saxon myth and Scandinavian myth. So I think the things I like about it are that sort of dramatic tension and the sort of old warrior story that he's trying to.
So what's funny?
Tolkien at one point said he wanted to give Britain its own mythology because it had borrowed its mythology.
Yes, I remember that.
Can I interject a question because it relates to what Ruth just said? Is it true that in the whole backstory to this, is it true that Lewis actually had, for the most part, Narnia mapped out in his head, and then he wrote, and Tolkien is sort of developing as he writes?
From what I remember
that might account for
in, is it Michael Ward's book, that I think that is true, at least of Lewis.
That might account for, you know, what you observed, Scott. The just slowly developing, and more and more information is revealed. And it's sort of like we talked about this with The Hobbit, how the story of Bilbo, who I guess I read somewhere originally was going to be named Bingo. Have you ever heard of that? But anyway, Bilbo finds the ring, and you know the episode with Gollum, and he changes it in the second edition of The Hobbit to reflect what's going on in the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And I think it was something I was reading on that was talking about how Tolkien, at the very least, was developing the story as he's writing it. It's not mapped out in his head. It's a kind of a hazy idea. Bruce, is there anything to that?
Yeah, my recollection, I had read this stuff years ago, was, you know, he had been working on it since his war days. Just a general mythology, especially the languages. He had worked on like his Elvish languages and stuff way before he had ever. And The Hobbit came out of, my recollection is it came out of like literally wanted to tell his grandkids or his son a good story. But then he had this whole backstory that was kind of working in his mind. And I've heard that what really made him actually sit down and say, I need to do it, was he was seeing the British countryside disappear to industrialization. And so
Yeah.
a lot of the story, a lot of the themes in the story, of course, they're Catholic and Christian because he commented on that later, but he more consciously what he was writing about was the overtaking of industrialization over these simple farm folks. So the Shire and the Hobbits sort of represent like the good of England that's being overrun by this corrupting industrialization that he was seeing, and everything that he knew about England and loved was kind of in his mind being taken over by corporations.
That's to me, that's rereading this and knowing, having read, a bunch of stuff on the Inklings and Tolkien himself. I mean, he was a kind of famous Luddite. Like he when automobile traffic started to come on the street in front of his house, I think he absolutely hated it. He tried to move, to a place that had less traffic. He hated industrialization a lot, and so that's one of the biggest themes I noticed in this book, as far as like a cohesive theme, which I actually think is kind of hard to pick out, but is a sort of anti-industrialization, anti-modernization. Anytime he even uses some phrases that are, I don't want to say anachronistic because what time is this in, but are sort of out of place for the land that have, that it would be coming from sort of early 20th century industrialization and modernization as the foil. In fact, a lot of what is trying, what happens in Mordor is, they're doing things at massive scale instead of like the artistry of the elves or sort of the careful, slow pace of the hobbits. They're doing things at scale, blacksmithing at scale, and this is what makes it not good.
Breeding soldiers at scale.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of interesting. But boy, I was gonna say, to my complaints, it's funny to me how much this sort of grates on me, because I like reading about Tolkien. I like reading about the Inklings in nonfiction. Like I read a 700-page book on nonfiction book on the Inklings and really enjoyed it, right? And then I get to this, which isn't as long as that, and it's the actual work of one of the Inklings, and it kind of grates on me, which is even more funny because I don't know about you, Bruce, but out of the three of us, I'm the only one that really reads novels like on the regular, and really enjoys them, like long novels, like everything Ken Follett, like the whole 9 yards, and getting through this just
I have
was
some
difficult
I have
for
some
me.
theories about this for you that actually have to do with
I read more historical fiction.
some of this, like what Bruce said about Tolkien being Catholic. I think the themes, some of these coherent themes, are one that just doesn't resonate with you, and so doesn't drive you forward.
I'm a Protestant work ethic guy.
Which is that it's not. You're supposed to be sort of driven up and forward and maybe pushed along without all the details, without all the facts, without it finished for you already, right? And you're used to Protestant and even Protestant apologetics where all the facts are here, it's done, your mission is complete, here's the information. And even with Lewis, there's much more of this. It's very apparent what we're waiting for. We're waiting for Aslan to return. We're waiting for Christ to return and come give us victory, right? And
I like that very much.
And so, and how we do that is going to be very clear once Aslan shows up. And with Tolkien, there's no, hey, you're waiting for Christ to arrive. It's, you are being driven on this mission, your life forward, sort of, pilgrim story, but expanded, and you don't know what the end is going to be, or the in-between, and you sort of have to be driven by the idea that what you're doing is the right thing.
It's very much an Augustinian pilgrimage in that sense, like the Catholic pilgrimage, the medieval pilgrimage, where you set out on a journey and you kind of know where you're going, and you know what you have to do when you get there, but you don't really know like what the journey is going to bring. You don't know the danger, and you don't know what you're going to learn, and you don't know if you're going to make it. Like that's all part of that. Augustine said in his theology, it's he always used to talk about how we're really just coming home. That's what God is doing to us. So for him, grace, different from Protestant grace, is a power that turns us around and shows us the right way to walk home. But we have a role in the walking. But for Augustine, this isn't salvific, but that's what we do. That's our contribution, not to salvation, but that's how we live the Christian life. The Christian life is a journey towards the grace that God is empowering us to walk on that journey to where we need to go. And I see that very much in the fellowship.
Yeah.
That's what I think Tolkien is tapping into.
Yeah, I think unfortunately my aggressive Lutheranism has made certain things harder for me. Like Gandalf to me is just a bad, like what I would now through the lens of Paulson and Ferdy just identify as a bad preacher.
Yeah.
He's just a bad preacher. He doesn't actually hand over the goods. He sets you on a mission and occasionally comes up, but when you really need a preacher, he's not always there. And so there's stuff like that where my theology is doing that, but I'm not unenjoying the story. I don't search out whimsy, but whimsy doesn't grate me as much as it grates you. Like my dad didn't like Tom Bombadil because he doesn't like whimsy.
I like Tom Bombadil. He is a controversial character. People either love or hate Tom Bombadil.
If there was a cliff near
you'd push him down
where Tom Bombadil lived, I would have tossed him.
I understand
off of
that urge. I understand it. I can respect pushing Tom Bombadil off a cliff. He won't die. He's eternal, so you can push him off a cliff.
So okay, what is he?
That's the huge controversy. No one knows who Tom Bombadil is supposed to represent. Although my understanding of the census among Tolkien scholars is that he's Tolkien himself in the work. The poet,
he's the story writer.
I've heard
the writer who's not corrupted by but also doesn't really have an important part in the story, but is in the world. That's
can change the story, right? It's interesting because there's almost like.
Okay, that's weird.
There's almost like a magician's nephew aspect to it too. Like his singing actually can change the world around him.
Yeah,
and so
he sings to the willow.
Mm-hmm.
He can't be corrupted by the ring. He's the only creature that can't be corrupted.
And can see Frodo when Frodo puts on the ring, right? So that there's some interesting stuff there. It always stuff like that is interesting, but does point out some, maybe makes some moral flaw in the story, which is why doesn't somebody like Tom Bombadil, who can't be corrupted and who's in this world, do the right thing, take the ring, and safely make the journey, since his life won't be lost, he's eternal, and do it. And so now there might be good reasons not to, right? And or there might be a complex reason not to, but from hey, there's a huge earth-shattering problem. Introducing characters who can solve it with a snap, right, are sort of an interesting thought experiment in why not just do, obviously because you want to tell a story, but
there are I'm not going to be able to pull them out, but this is a literary theme to introduce a character who's got the power. I mean, it oftentimes represents sort of like what we call a deistic version of God, right? The character who's got the power to fix everything, but for whatever reason doesn't. And
I think Tolkien says it in the book, if I remember right, that the reason why Tom doesn't, I think what's their name says this later, or someone says it about Tom, that he doesn't, the ring can't corrupt him because he has he's the only thing in the whole Middle Earth that never desires it.
Yeah.
So he's sort of a like Adam who doesn't find covetousness. He doesn't covet anything.
You also get the sense that if Mordor wins and takes over, that for him that'll just be like a period in time, right?
I do get that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. That for the hobbits and for maybe even Gandalf, who's very old, but I mean, Tom Bombadil has been there before Gandalf. And Tom Bombadil's been there before Sauron, right? And that it won't be great because he talks about a time, I forgot what the name of it, but he talks about a time where there even in the area that he lives where there was a lot of corruption. But now that time has passed and they're here, and there's another time coming that seems like it'll be similar to that, but that'll pass too. For him, everything is just sort of a movement in time, and has its time. So he's not as worried about it as, I mean, when he's like, handling the ring, he's like, yeah, interesting. But that's about it.
Caleb, you said earlier that Gandalf, doesn't bring the goods as a good preacher, and I would tend to agree with that. But have you guys ever read Peter Kreeft's interpretation of Gandalf?
Mm-mm.
Do you know Peter Kreeft? He's a Catholic theologian and philosopher.
Yeah.
Pretty well-known philosopher, and loves Lord of the Rings, loves it. And there's actually some great YouTube lectures. I don't remember how to find them. Maybe
I'm gonna find those because this might help me.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about the black speech and the word of Mordor and how the word, it can be languages and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, he actually sees the main theme, if I remember this right, that Gandalf, Frodo, and Strider, Aragorn, are the three offices of Christ. That's what they represent in the book. So Gandalf is the prophet, and Aragorn is the king, and Frodo is the priest. And the way he divides this up is he says Gandalf doesn't preach. He's always coming and going because he's the prophet. He speaks of doom, but he can't accomplish whatever he's prophesying. That's not his role. So his role is to prepare the way for always the one who will have to do the thing that they have to do. The dwarves, Bilbo, Frodo, he's preparing the way. He's a John the Baptist like character. Yeah. So he represents and he has a death and resurrection, Kreeft says. So he takes up the Christ office in the prophetic sense. Strider also has a death and resurrection when he goes into Hades, or the land of the dead, and he rescues those who are imprisoned there and takes them out, and then takes his high spot as king. And then Frodo also has a death experience on Weathertop when he is pierced for the mission, and then carries the wound with him for the rest of his life. So Kreeft, it's interesting, Aslan in Lewis is clearly the Christ figure. He's the whole Christ figure. But I like Kreeft's interpretation of, what we have here is not one character in Lord of the Rings that represents. We have three books that and three main characters who are the three offices of Christ.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to watch those lectures because I feel like this type of thing helps me. I'm dense sometimes with this stuff. I don't see it unless it's like put on a poster right in front of me.
Yeah, I think I think this is one of the troubles with where a book that requires a little more literary interpretation, because those office aspects, that makes sense and are there, but each of those characters also possesses attributes or actions that are, anti-Christ-like, right? Like Frodo ultimately has massive failures throughout the thing that are not possible for Christ to fail and sin in such ways. Gandalf maybe too. That's maybe trickier, but yeah, there's parts of that where, and Strider certainly, right? Strider has romantic interests, and Aragorn, and so there's just pieces of them that can't be Christ. So you can find, maybe the three parts of Christ's office there, but you can't actually find Christ himself in any of their characters.
That's kind of funny with the Aragorn, because you very much can see him as a second Adam, the second Adam, right? Yeah. Where his ancestor is the one who held on to the ring in the first place, and sort of eventually caused it to be lost. And that's interesting. I'm going to watch this.
I think, Caleb, you're right. I would not disagree with you at all. I would just say I think the difference is in the intention of the author.
Right.
Like, Lewis set out to write the Christian story and metaphor. Tolkien actually, in the introduction of the version I have, which is probably from the 90s, it was one of Tolkien's introductions in it. He blatantly says, I didn't write this as a Christian metaphor, but my Catholicism is imbibed within it. So I don't think Tolkien ever wanted us to be like, well, these are the three offices and these characters are perfect.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, but I think that's also the nice thing about The Lord of the Rings, is that you can kind of and kind of make up some of where you want to see the Christian stuff in it so that the story can come alive to you. Or you can't do that as easily with Lewis because he makes it so clear what he's intending the characters to be in many cases. And that's not a knock on Lewis. It's just a difference in how the authors are trying to work their story.
And I'd say it's not even a knock on Tolkien because, like you said, the intent isn't sort of this same apologetic, building Christ in the imagination intent that Lewis has. It's just like when people ask, because I think one of the reasons people ask the Thinking Fellows for years to do something like this is sort of Christian interpretation of it, right? They don't. I don't think people are asking, do we like or dislike the books? I think part of it is helping to maybe find some of those things, right? So people watch the movie or read the books, and then know that Tolkien was a Christian, part of the Inklings, and so then maybe we're set out to do some of this interpretive work, and it just presents a harder challenge because you might see some of these things, but then you also end up speaking for the author maybe, or trying to not speak for the author, and it's just a more difficult task because certainly, and I wouldn't deny this, there are Christian themes throughout, and especially I think Catholic ones as well. I think that Augustinian model of grace and a pilgrimage is, a huge overarching portion of this, and especially sort of a divinely enchanted world as well is a part of it. But I do think just picking out Christian doctrine is not the project here when you do this. And so when we do a Thinking Fellows episode on it like this, I think that would be the caveat I give listeners is it's very difficult for us to just go on a doctrine hunt.
Although the dude that did Dogmatics did.
Well, he didn't do it from primarily the Lord of the Rings, so he did it from personal letters of Tolkien and places where he actually explicitly spoke on theology.
I just looked at Peter Kreeft on YouTube and Lord of the Rings. I'm going to go in a whole masterclass on this stuff by the next
He's
time.
great. I can't recommend. I mean, I don't agree with everything, of course, but he's a fantastic commentator.
I'm looking forward to him changing my perspective on this whole thing.
Part of what we're talking about here is us, especially not Bruce. I'm going to exclude you from this critique, but I am critiquing myself here. Is maybe we're expecting too much. We're expecting from Tolkien in the book. We're not letting Tolkien do his thing. We're looking for a product. We want a Tolkien who thinks like we do, and we want Tolkien to do what we think he ought to do. And that's the one thing I guess I struggled with in reading the book. And one is you gave us a week, Caleb.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
400 whatever page. Okay,
2 weeks.
But do I read this just to enjoy the story? Do I read this to kind of have it shape me a little bit? Do I go on a doctrine hunt? Which,
it's obviously what I did.
Yeah. So as I think about just the story, there is some like Bruce said earlier, this idea of a pilgrimage, that we're in time and space, and this is just sort of penultimate to what is the ultimate, and this notion there. I thought I had dog-eared it, which I never do to books, but I did in this book because it's just a cheap paperback. But there's a place where Gandalf tells Frodo that it says something to the effect of, it doesn't put it this way, but it's your duty just to do this. You don't know where it's going to go, and you just keep trucking along. And that there's something, I guess, stoic.
Yeah, that must be
there that I admire.
There's something analogous to that so if we're saying, put Christian theology, your Christian theology of sanctification aside, right? In sort of some of your vocations, that is kind of the thing, right? Maybe that the end is to destroy the ring, or maybe in the case as a father to raise good kids, but you have no idea where the journey's going. You really don't.
But he doesn't know that that's the end in this first book that we're talking about.
He does by solidly the middle. Is to destroy it.
Yeah, and certainly by the end when the fellowship's broken.
By what did you say, Bruce?
I think he pretty much knows by the Mines
leaving
of
the
Moria,
Shire.
like, yeah.
Oh, I
things
don't
are-
get the sense that
He
by
says,
leaving
"I'm
the
not
Shire.
returning. That
Well,
I
I
have
think
to go."
I think he knows that.
He
but...
and Gandalf have decided that it has to be destroyed. He doesn't know how, but he knows that much. He knows I'm probably not returning. He doesn't want any of his friends to really go with because they will likely won't return also.
I don't think he knows until it's broken into 2 books, right? I don't think he knows till the beginning. I don't think he knows for sure what the heck he's doing until the council.
Big disagree.
I agree. I don't think he really knows till the council.
Yeah, I don't think he knows. I think he knows that
He
something.
has an intuition, maybe.
Yeah, that something's got to happen. Like the council would turn out differently if he knew for sure. Like originally, he's like, well, here it is, like, and you know, that's when the decision is made and the realization by not just him, but by a lot of people. I don't even really think. I mean, maybe Gandalf does know for sure, but you don't get the sense that it's totally clear even for him. I didn't. Maybe I'm dense.
Gandalf does. I mean, so maybe they don't know that who's going on the journey or when precisely, but I mean, Gandalf mentions that there's only one fire hot enough to destroy
he
it.
does.
In
the
the Shire.
That's early on.
Frodo knows that he's going on the journey that's at least part of the journey to destroy it. Does know that he's not returning likely.
But they mention many, many, many times in the first 14 chapters that they are trying to get to Rivendell.
Yeah. Well, they don't have any knowledge of the world.
Yeah.
Right. So
they are trying to get to Rivendell. In fact, Merry and Pippin and even Sam and I think even Frodo, I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that just would be dying to correct me on this, even talk about, where are you going? Rivendell.
Yeah, they think they can just drop the ring off there with
Yeah.
Elrond. That's the end of it. Yeah.
I do kind of
But to
like
Adam's
that
point-
twist, though. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, but to Adam's point, I think, for a guy who had been in the First World War and was living through the Second World War and then living in a, the idea of British duty embodied in the monarch, all of that is so British, right?
That is.
To stress that idea of duty, yeah, you can take it too far. And like you said, Caleb, you don't want to mix that into sanctification. But there is something in our world today where I wish more people would just sort of do their duty sometimes and not always want to
chase their emotion.
just do something because it's convenient or pleasant to them or because they're feeling like it's the right thing. Well, I don't feel it, so I can't do it. Well, sometimes you just have to not feel it and do it anyway. It's your duty. But
The other
that
part
seems
is
like a more old-fashioned, seems so old-fashioned to think that way now.
And I like this, to go with Adam as well. I like this idea, and where you're picking up, where he thinks the journey's over when he gets to Rivendell, the easy part. In retrospect, it's oh, that was kind of difficult. Here's a ring. It's that was uncomfortable. And turns out that is not the end. And so when and again, maybe in life, maybe you've done one uncomfortable or hard thing, that's not sort of the end. Turns out you got to keep going. And how many times when you do stuff is that sort of the story?
I think it's funny. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Adam, but early on in my marriage, we had some times that we thought were rough times, and I actually have a memory of saying, boy, if we could get through that, we can get through anything, right? And then you go through a really hard time, you look back when you said that, and you're like, yeah, that was illustrative of nothing.
Did you guys even though it graded you a little bit, and I'll ask Adam. Adam, did you like this better than The Hobbit? I did. I feel like the journey started. The journey started more precisely because some more information was there, a little more noble and a little more I really want to follow this, right?
Although, sorry, you asked Adam. Go ahead.
Well, it'd be interesting for somebody else to do a podcast on our podcast about this and analyze
How
our
ignorant we are.
interpretation of it. And I keep going back to this, what you've said, Scott, everything's kind of convoluted, I guess. it's like as Lutherans, we're used to cutting to the chase.
Yeah,
and
I really like that.
and Tolkien does not do that. And there's something a little more realistic in Tolkien.
Yeah.
As odd as that is to say, and it's Narnia is not predictable, but it's it's like, oh, this is the way it's going to go. You kind of know the way it's going to go. And it's very, whereas in Tolkien or in the Fellowship of the Ring and the other two that we have to read in the next 2 weeks. Thanks, Caleb.
I thought it was a week for the next one.
No, it's 2 for the next one.
It's almost I don't know if there's anything to this, but Plato's Republic. One of the things that's always confused me, or always kind of I guess confused me, is you can read Plato's Republic and it seems like it's kind of a map to what good political order would look like, with a philosopher king like myself maybe at top. But really what the Republic is an analogy to the human soul. And it's almost like there's this deeper, I think maybe this is why Bruce is a pretty deep dude. There's something very deep to this story. And it's something like when I'm reading, I'm like, gosh, I wish I had a year to slowly go through this and let it not change me, but let it kind of take over my thoughts rather than me imposing my thoughts or my expectations on the text. And back to your question, Caleb, I didn't like having to read this in 2 weeks, but I really did enjoy reading it. I do, I think you've accused me a couple times, Caleb, over the years of being a crypto Thomist or something like that, which I'm not. But
you've accused yourself of it.
We don't think you are. We don't think you are.
Yeah.
But I do like this motif of pursuing virtue in a temporal, rightly understood, a temporal way. And the way Frodo, back in the Hobbit with Bilbo, I think we talked about this last week or whenever it is we recorded that. That Bilbo develops along the way, and he becomes the leader at the end, in a sense. And I like the development of Frodo. I guess is probably the most enjoyable thing to me. The development dare I say, in virtue, if you will.
Yeah, I do too. I like that Frodo's journey sort of starts with him as the leader of his group, the person who has sort of this mission ahead, but also the interest in the party's well-being and the like as well. I like where that goes. So, or starts for Frodo a lot. And I think one of the tricks with this is that there is something valuable about frustrations that we all talk about the world right now, like Bruce was talking about, that I wish more people would do the hard thing or the virtuous thing, go against sort of their feelings at times, and that a story that sort of puts that in your heart and your imagination is potentially a valuable thing. I do think that it's interesting how much this is in the culture and the sort of the pop conscience, and when I hear people talk about it, I don't necessarily hear that lesson being reflected. I just hear how cool the world is.
Well, maybe it's resonating with them on a level they don't like. They're not really thinking out cognitively. Oh, I had one thing that. Am I the only one that really can't stand Frodo?
Apparently.
No, I never liked Frodo, even though the books, I almost think he's purposefully not. He can't be a great character because like all the characters around him are
better.
The real drama.
He is so unlikable. He is so snitty to everybody.
Yeah, he's a whiny baby.
He's got this like entitlement that he's better than the other hobbits because just by some chance of being related to Bilbo, he's the one that's got the ring, and it drives me nuts. He's not better than the other hobbits, by the way.
I agree with you on that.
No, Sam is like the most virtuous.
Sam's the man.
Yeah.
But I will insert my rant here that I was doing before we started recording, which is, I think, Caleb, to your point, this is the difference between the Lord of the Rings, the books, and Amazon's attempts to throw together nonsense with the Rings of Power, because the Rings of Power is just a world.
It's aesthetic.
It's a story, but it loses all of the depth that Lord of the Rings has. And the true Lord of the Rings fans will tell you this is why it was so lambasted everywhere. Is what Amazon did is they threw a lot of money and said, we can immerse you in a world that you've never seen before, and we can spend, $100 million an episode or whatever. But the story it sucked. Like, it was just a bad story. Like, it wasn't, there was no foundations to it. It was just like, they just thought they could win people over by spending a lot of money and making it look nice.
I don't even think they accomplished that. I
agree.
I thought
completely.
the CG on it was...
It's proof that practical effects really are better
best.
when you can do practical effects. It's really
and
better.
Plus, it was obvious that it was filmed during COVID because all of the sort of live scenes were super small scale.
Yeah.
Like two to three characters at a time in a giant room. That probably was from what I've heard, was just a giant empty room that was like 280 degrees green screen. Which makes a lot of sense, and also makes a lot of sense for like the one-dimensional character of their acting, because they're interacting just with other people who probably don't even have to be in costume for them to pull this off completely in a room that's supposed to be like a palace or something. That's really just they didn't even pull that off for me. I thought I find I just should do the reading, because I actually find sort of the backstory stuff very interesting, but not the way they're doing it, and how boring it had to be up until like the last episode.
2 episodes, yeah.
Yeah.
The most boring television show made since Leave It to Beaver.
I guess that's...
It was boring.
You don't like Leave It to Beaver either?
No, for Pete's sake. That was such 1950s modernist moralistic crap.
But I remember years ago I went to a lecture where Tim Keller was one of the speakers, and he made a comment about, it was a cultural comment, it wasn't about Lord of the Rings. And he asked he opened up by asking the question, why is the poem Beowulf, why was that such a big poem? Why was that important? Why do we still read it? Like, what does it matter? Like, there's nothing in that story that really appeals to our modern culture, but it's like this classic. And his argument was, well, that story was told because it was trying to reinforce something in the culture, which was a warrior culture. They were a warrior culture, and they needed to produce warriors. So you tell Beowulf myths and you tell Beowulf stories to produce warriors. And then he was saying, there's all these LGBTQ stories out today. You're going to produce a certain kind of, not that you're going to produce gay people. He wasn't saying that, but he was saying, like, you're going to produce a pro-gay lobbying group if you are telling these are the stories our culture is telling, so that they tell these stories to create a certain type of person. There's cultural formation in myth and story. That was his point. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the appeals to the Lord is kind of like, you can find it appealing because it's just a fantasy world. But one of the things I find appealing to it, and I think a lot of the Tolkien fans find appealing to it, is it gives you, and this goes back to Adam's virtue comment, it gives you a vision of a kind of person you can be that you're not. Like, maybe you can sacrifice for someone else and go on a journey. Maybe you are a weak hobbit, but you can find the strength. Maybe you are the king who has a bad history and isn't able to face it, or find one of the characters. That's a powerful myth, right? It's able to draw out of you and present a vision to you as something that maybe you should strive for, and that goes back to virtue and duty. But the kind of beauty of the Lord of the Rings, in its realism, to Scott's earlier comment, is all the characters are flawed. So even Frodo can't do it on his own. So on the one hand, it presents like this, almost at surface level, seems like a sort of pop psychology or a self-help book. Like, well, you can do it, but then it actually shows like, but you can't do it. You do need a fellowship, and the fellowship will break, and you do need others, and they're going to be corrupted. And, there's no character that gets out of the books without having some flaws and having made some mistakes.
I think closest
Gandalf trusts Sauron. Like, there's mistakes everywhere with every character.
Mm-hmm. The closest is Aragorn to me. I just think his biggest flaw, if indeed he has one that's like purposely written in, is just his temptation to not step up to the role of king that he needs to step up to because he's worried about becoming like his ancestor. And even that in my opinion, it's a little virtuous because he knows at the end of the day that he'll be subject to the same temptations.
He's just a man.
When it comes to the rings, there is a lot of virtue in realizing your possible weaknesses. Now, it takes him a hot minute, and some encouraging. And I think you're right. I don't know when he goes into, you said Hades, which I kind of loved that, into the mountain, right, to the dead people. That's when he first has to claim that he's the king, right? And
his flaw there is he doesn't want to save those people.
Yeah.
Elrond has to convince him to. Elrond and circumstance have to convince him to go there.
Well, because that is flaw there, but they weren't. His flaw there is a lack of forgiveness for their dishonor.
Yeah,
I think as I think about it, right, when we talk about, say, hey, being careful about sanctification and the Pilgrim novel and doing what is in you and stuff, part of that is we're saying don't get your preaching mixed up with be virtuous because you need to be virtuous for God, right? And that might make it so that that fiction becomes out instead of Christian preaching in our theology, public theology, or our proclamation is the right space for this, right? That these things that are not just theology, but actually, like Bruce said, help form people in your culture and society, which isn't just a Christian one, but is one with neighbors that you have to live with and endure and improve for the sake of those around you. Maybe it does feel like the right space where it's, as long as this, I'm not preaching the Lord of the Rings now, in order to try to get people to save themselves or turn to God by virtue, or by the power that's in them, that this is the right space for forming, cultural conscience or things like that.
I'm looking forward to talking about his trip into the mountain.
Oh, cool.
Because I guess I should say something, but he's kind of a Jonah character, but a redeemed Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
Jonah never wants to go to Nineveh, and then he's not really good at accomplishing the task once he's there. And you kind of got the other way going on with Aragon.
Well, cool. This is
like I said, masterclass. Peter Kreeft. I'm gonna get into it.
He's coming back.
I gotta recommend you gotta look up the one is somewhere on there where he talks about the black speech of Mordor, because that's a very Lutheran kind of nice Catholic. Like he talks about the corrupting power of speech and the word, and why they won't utter the black speech. Like it's. I remember that one being very blowing my mind.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be good for him because he'll be able to mix in. He'll be able to dial down the whimsy. I also say. I haven't read these in a while, but as my memory serves, less and less whimsy the farther we get, and more business. Yeah,
dude, his series of talks on the morality in Lord of the Rings is 3 hours. I'm in this for our listeners.
Great 3 hours though. Don't regret.
For our listeners, I'm gonna do it.
That's good. Very cool.
And put in the work.
Hey there! Thank you for listening to this episode of Thinking Fellows podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, found it helpful or entertaining, or maybe you sat there frustrated the whole time wishing you could host this show, thank you for sticking it out with us. And if you'd like to hear more of the Thinking Fellows, if you'd like to support us and the rest of the podcast network at 1517, you can go to 1517.org/donate. It is really the help of donors and listeners and their support that keeps the podcast network going, keeps shows like the Thinking Fellows an ad-free end-to-end experience, and makes it so that we can continue to keep all of our content free and open for everybody. We appreciate those who support us like that, and if you are new to the show and would like to hear our next episodes, which will be 2 weeks from now on the Two Towers, we will... you should subscribe. That's what you should do. I was looking for the right words. You should subscribe to the show because then you will not miss the episode as they come out. Thank you for listening. We will catch you next time. Bye.